of items on the agenda items that we will be talking about in a short while, maybe while we are waiting for them to walk in. I can say that one of the things that are certainly on the agenda is a fear, certainly among South African businesses, that there may just be another meltdown in Zimbabwe, and that is coming from South African companies that have not been paid, but also information gathered that suggests that Zimbabwe is unable to balance its books. Now, that has been a source of fear, but we'll get into those issues later. Let's listen to the 21 gun salute, as well as the anthems that will follow thereafter. Let's listen and watch. Push it this way. Well, President Robert Mugabe on his state visit, together with his host, President Jacob Zuma, the two heads of state, introducing their respective delegations. They are going to meet behind closed doors, and that is where several issues will be raised. Each of the delegations will, of course, led by their respective, presidents, in the presence of their ministers and other bureaucrats, will be having some serious talks, we are told, over a number of issues. Certainly from where South Africa stands, there are trade issues to be discussed, and among them the fear among South Africa's business entities that are doing business in Zimbabwe, over some of them complaining that they haven't been paid, fearing that there may just be another meltdown in Zimbabwe. As to how true that is, we do not know yet, but there is that lingering fear, and that issue is going to be raised. Another issue that's going to be raised, we're told, is the issue of Zimbabwe's unilateral, from where South Africa sits, Zimbabwe's unilateral imposition of trade tariffs, because the Zimbabweans seem to believe that business is skewed in one direction, and that is South Africans benefiting from trade with Zimbabwe hugely and in South Africans' favor. But if, of course, you look at the amount of trade and the extent of trade that's involved between the two countries, no one should really be surprised. I mean, you're talking about almost 25 billion rands in South Africa's favor against a mere 2 billion rands on the Zimbabwe side. That cannot be a healthy situation. So Zimbabwe is keen to get more out of it. But of course, South Africa is not convinced that imposing trade, tariffs, is the way to go about addressing that particular concern. Whether, of course, they will emerge out of today's meetings with anything positive, or that will begin to address their concerns, remains to be seen. Another issue that's firmly on the agenda, we are told, is the issue of lots of illegal, in particular, Zimbabweans that are here in the country, causing a lot of security concerns or apprehension, but also how to deal with those that are here legally, and to ensure that the skills issues are addressed, but also those people are treated the way they deserve to be treated, because from the Zimbabwean side, they too are complaining that some of the professionals that are here, or people who want to come here, do not get treated fairly. So among the issues that are going to be on the agenda today, for sure. But there are other issues, unconfirmed, that people have been speculating over the past few days about several other issues that may just be on the agenda. Among those issues, the issue of the renditions, which, as many people would know, has had several casualties. Among those casualties, Hawks head General Anwar Dramat, as well as the head of IPED, Robert McBride, who were embroiled in controversies involving, of course, also the Minister of Police, Minister Nathi Nhleko, as well, to a lesser extent, as the National Commissioner of Police, Ria Piecha.
Now, looking at some of these issues, we don't know for sure
if that particular issue will be on the agenda. Elvis?
Now, you did have a take on the economic trade between the two countries. We understand that there's also going to be a bilateral commission being established between the two countries.
Certainly, that is one of the issues that, the two governments will be putting their signatures on that, because, both countries are quite keen to make sure that both politically and economically issues, they have channels to actually address very specific issues. On the economic front, Zimbabwe, as I said earlier, is quite keen to grow its presence in South Africa. And likewise, South Africa, even though trade is skewed in its favor at the moment, hugely so, South Africa remains keen to actually make sure that it gets more from its trade relations with Zimbabwe. And at the moment, the issues I've raised in particular, the unilateral imposition of trade tariffs is a sore point from South Africa, and South Africa believes that if Zimbabwe wants to increase its trade with South Africa, trade tariffs are not the way to go about doing it. We did pick up even a possibility that South Africa would have wanted to retaliate, but of course other people believing that maybe everyone should allow the process that is beginning now and see if this particular process that's being started or kick-started today will yield better results than something like that, than a retaliation that may just bring about hostilities that may worsen the situation, or that may simply not address the issues that both countries believe need to be addressed. Elvis?
21 years into a democracy, and the president from Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, has had limited visits, or state visits for that matter, to this country. Why is that the reason?
Well, your guess would be as good as mine, but do remember that Zimbabwe has been through a lot over the past 15 or so years, especially. Remember, it was on the brink of a serious economic meltdown. President Mugabe and ZANU-PF were facing perhaps the most serious challenge to their domination that they have ever faced since 1980. The MDC was a force to be reckoned with, and with the panic and everything that went on there, you had that situation was accompanied by some serious gross human rights violations. You had farm invasions at certain points. In time, Zimbabwe running out of fuel, running out of food, and this was formerly a country that was the breadbasket of the region. So all those issues had, their impact on the thinking, but also on how Zimbabwe was run. And when South Africa tried to step in because of, for economic reasons, but also for security reasons, there was a bit of apprehension on the part of Zimbabweans, because Zimbabwe felt that South Africa was using the opportunity to impose Western-inspired values and ways of going about, of Zimbabwe doing its business with its people. So there were hostilities. But over time, South Africa, through former President Thabo Mbeki, got involved, and over time tried to win President Mugabe over, and they actually succeeded. Because remember, it is as a result of those processes that President Mugabe started warming up to the idea of a government of national unity, which involved the MDC at the time. And ironically, it is actually President Mugabe and ZANU-PF that have actually benefited from that arrangement, because if you look at where the MDC is today, nowhere to be seen, and Zimbabwe having made strides in rebuilding its economy and in cooling the relations. So there is no more, the sort of things that we were talking about 10, 15 years ago are still there, but certainly not to the extent that they were back in those years. But Zimbabwe does need to kickstart its economy, but also to actually do something about its relationship, in particular with such an economic powerhouse as South Africa.
Now, talking about the economy, Zimbabwe's economy is expected to weaken even further this year, according to the IMF, because last year they grew by 3.1%. But the Zimbabwean finance minister said that Harare expects to clear their arrears of the fund that they have to pay back on an annual basis. But this seems to be an issue in terms of the economic growth for the country. Is this maybe part and parcel of this particular state visit at this point in time?
Well, certainly. Remember, that's where the the antennas went up when Zimbabwe could not honor its obligations to the IMF and the World Bank. But add to that what I was saying earlier, which is now South African businesses operating in Zimbabwe are saying that some of them have not been paid, and they have raised this issue with the South African government, trying to see if there cannot be an intervention. Add again to that some information or intelligence that has been gathered which suggests that Zimbabwe is not able to balance its books. Now, that is a very toxic combination because it raises a fear that in no time there may just be, an economic meltdown may just revisit Zimbabwe. So all those things, we are told, are firmly on the agenda, because if anything, South Africa would want Zimbabwe to actually see Zimbabwe getting back on its feet, because that's not only good for Zimbabwe, it's also good for South Africa, Elvis.
Now, we did touch on the issue of the legal renditions a little bit earlier, and you did indicate that there were some casualties right here in South Africa. Anwar Dramat is one of them. What else can we expect from this particular talks taking place this morning?
Well, we do expect, Zimbabwe to come with some serious innovation in terms of how it sees its relationship with South Africa growing beyond this point, because the issues I've spoken about so far are the issues we're picking up from what South African businesses are telling us, also from what some of the people who are in the know within government are telling us. We do not know what it is that Zimbabwe itself wants to put on the table by way of new initiatives or issues that it believes need to be addressed, and need to be addressed rather urgently. They cannot come to a meeting of this nature empty-handed. Well, other people have speculated, of course, about the SADC industrialization conference that's coming up, which Zimbabwe needs to host. But there, again, there's a great deal of negativity, certainly from what the government officials are telling us, because from where they sit, they would not have liked to see or to hear some of the things that are being said. And one of those things that are being said is that Zimbabwe is coming here to ask for some money to be able to host that conference. But even if that was the case, or that was to be true, we haven't received any confirmation of whether or not, in fact, that is going to be on the table. But if it was to happen, then it also gives credence to the issues I spoke about earlier, which is that Zimbabwe is running out of cash, and that is not good for any economic relations moving forward. But of course, there will be a media briefing a little later, and that is where we will be told, we will be briefed about the issues that will have been discussed. That is also where we will have opportunities to actually raise some of these issues with both governments.
Vuyo, thank you so much for that report. We'll cross back to the Union buildings a little bit later. But let's now continue with our normal broadcast.
Zoom into Africa.
Do we know what's going to happen now? Okay. Thanks.
For the inside.
I'm going to stay here.